I just want to welcome everyone to our Leadership Now series. We are so excited to have Dr. Ralph Kilmann on here today as our guest. For those of you who are new to this series, we like to bring thought leaders, mentors, teachers, role models in here and create this community of like-mindedness where we get to learn and grow from each other. And Ralph, I am so beyond honored to have you that you were able to say yes. I'm going to give you a little, just the people who are listening, a little background, because Dr. Ralph Kilmann is actually, he's kind of a big deal. He's going to be talking about how to resolve wicked conflicts in our increasingly turbulent times, which is what we need so much. Ralph Kilmann is the CEO of Kilmann Diagnostics and the co-author of the TKI Conflict Assessment Tool, which is the standard conflict tool out there. And he has written over 20 management books, has published over 100 professional articles, and also has created over 10 assessments. He's taught thousands and thousands of university students, has worked with amazing organizations, government, consulting. The Kilmann Diagnostic website, or his company, they have so many online materials that has been used within NASA, the Department of Defense, Amazon, ExxonMobil. I mean, you name it, Dr. Ralph is in there. And so here's his credentials. And I look at this, Ralph, and I just go, oh my goodness. So you earned both your Bachelor of Science degree in Graphic Arts Management and Master of Science degree in the Industrial Administration from Carnegie Mellon University. You got your Ph.D. degree in the Behavioral Science and Management Social Systems at the University of California. You were the professor in the Katz Graduate School of Business, University of Pittsburgh for 30 years. He has worked with, so this is not our president, but he's worked with the President Department. He's worked with the U.S. Census Bureau. You've worked with NASA. I mean, when I say you are a big deal, you are a big deal. And Eric and I always say that you are the Einstein of conflict and change management. And Ralph, again, I am so humbled and honored that you are here with us today.
Well, Mary, you're making me blush. It is my pleasure to be here. I so adore you and Eric, and it's my honor to participate. So thank you for asking me.
Oh, of course. You know, so just a little background before we get into your topic. So I was just saying this prior to everyone coming on, that there are no coincidences. Eric and I were actually creating it was our communication class. It was the Advantage, our engaged communication. We're like, we need a conflict tool in this. So I'm doing all this research, and it kept popping up, the TKI, Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Assessment. And I'm like, what is this? So I go to, it takes me to your website, Kilmann Diagnostics. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get certified in this. Still not understanding everything, but I'm like, okay, so I'm high in competing and accommodating. It was a Friday. I was at Bold. Eric sends me this message. He goes, hey, on LinkedIn, they're doing this beta 2-day live class in Victoria on Monday. I just signed you and Amber up to go. And so I get home from Bold on Saturday. Sunday, we're driving up to Victoria. Monday morning, we come in and we're at the very front table, and here you are. It's just Amber and me and you. And I got to sit and learn under you for 2 days. And then fast forward, 6 months later, one of our clients went to your 2-day class in Los Angeles. They were asking us to be on the Leadership Summit to teach, and they found out that I had been through it. And next thing you know, we're at the Camelot learning from you. I mean, you talk about just, there are no coincidences.
No.
So I want to know, because everyone wants to know underneath the hood. I mean, we're going to get into conflict, which is so important now. But why? How did this ever start? What was your journey? What created this curiosity for conflict and change management?
Well, I am sure there have been many influences starting in very early childhood, and I'll never fully understand the entire sequence. But certainly, part of my heritage is very, very relevant to conflict management. My parents grew up in Germany. My mother, Jewish, my father, Protestant. They got married in 1929. Hitler took over control of Germany in 1933, and they eventually escaped from Germany in 1936, because otherwise my mother would have been in a concentration camp, and my parents actually had to get a divorce, otherwise they put my father in jail. That's the way it worked. And so during my childhood, and then my grandmother was in a concentration camp for a while, my mother's mother. And so there I am growing up, and you hear the stories about conflict, division, and how people can't resolve their differences, and how they're at each other and they don't listen to each other, and there's hatred, there's anger. And so I think that was a powerful influence. And certainly in today's world, some of that is potentially being recreated again, because there's huge divisions in this country. And the question is, how do we resolve those conflicts? And the problems today are more complicated than they've ever were back in the 1930s, because we have things now like pandemics and climate change and all kinds of other stuff going on. We've got wicked messes. We have globalization, diversity in the workplace. There's an opportunity for conflict like never, ever before. So I wish I could tell you that when Ken and I developed the TKI in the early 70s, we anticipated and we knew that the world would go increasingly diverse and conflicted. We didn't. We just were interested in the topic. Both Ken and I have our own sources on what got us into conflict. But look what unfolded. I couldn't have predicted it. And yet now, when you ask CEOs, what is the #1 topic they need to learn more about? It's conflict management. And clearly, you don't have to look very far in today's world to see that if we don't learn how to manage conflict well, in a healthy way, in a respectful way, we're going downhill, and we can't define and solve any of our complex messes.
So you talk about the conflict that happened way back in the day, even with Hitler, and where we're at today, and we're in a different time. We're in unprecedented time, but at the same time, human behavior is human behavior.
Yeah.
Has that changed? I mean, just how we handle conflict?
Well, I think that in some ways, people have said that if you don't understand history, it's doomed to repeat. And there are lessons that it could have been learned from many civilizations well before Germany. But because of my heritage with my parents and the stories I heard, Germany plays a particular role. But I'm sure you could find many, many examples in the millennia to describe the kind of conflict that has unfolded. And when I experience division and people at each other and not listening to each other and not even engaging in a healthy conversation about what their differences are, then we're back to square one. So yes, in some ways, people are people. And the other theme that we have to really stress is the whole subject of mental health versus mental illness, and what is enlightened leadership versus malignant leadership. And so there are topics that are unfolding in today's world that if we don't address, we can't get together and solve the complex problems, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's climate change, whatever the topic is, it's just too messy. And if we don't know how to resolve conflict, we can't get to square one.
So how do you resolve conflict?
Well, the first thing to appreciate is the nature of a problem, because all conflict is driven by problems. There's a gap between what is and what could or should be. There's a gap between what you believe and someone else believes. How do you resolve those differences? So there has to be an understanding of a problem. A simple problem is where one person can have all the information and knowledge to solve it. So you go to school, you learn a specialty, the problem is within your specialty, you don't have to know anything else, you can define and solve it, no big deal. A complex problem, by definition, cannot possibly be solved by one person because it involves so many different areas of expertise. One person doesn't have the wisdom, the knowledge, the experience, the dedication, the schooling to understand the whole problem. So you have to bring different people together. So you take the pandemic, for example. You have to know something about politics, public health. You have to know something about systemic racism. You have to know something in the medical sciences. You have to know about the spread of viruses. You have to know about transportation. You have to know about schools. You have to know about the economy. These things are all intertwined. You can't address the pandemic problem by focusing just on public health, or just opening up the economy, or just understanding medical science, or not realizing that this kicks up issues that have unresolved, like systemic racism, because we find out that people of color have a harder time getting health care than people who are the privileged white in our given society. So there's all these interminglings. And as a result, the only way to solve these conflicts is to be able to bring experts together from the different fields. Now, how do you get these experts to talk, to chat with one another, to respect one another, to listen to one another, to develop creative solutions? You need an infrastructure. You need a behavioral infrastructure. In my work, I do this through 3 tracks: culture track, skills track, team track. At a minimum, there's got to be a culture that supports integrity, honesty, sensitivity, and respect for other people. They have to have good communication skills, so you don't get one another defensive, you really listen to one another. You have to have the skills for understanding assumptions and how do you work with complex problems. You get diverse experts together who think that their specialty is the end all, the answer for everything. Then you can't use that wisdom that's in the room to solve the problem, because everyone just speaks from their point of view, doesn't listen to anyone else, and thinks they're right and everyone else is wrong. So just assembling diverse experts isn't enough. You have to have that infrastructure. And that takes sometimes days or weeks to develop. But if you don't develop it, sure, get all the experts together. No conversation, no listening, no resolution, no synergy. So bottom line is, we have to create an environment, an infrastructure that allows diverse experts to work together in creative ways to resolve these problems, with the realization that I need you. I need all these different areas of expertise. I can't do it by myself. I am ignorant on this complex mess, what we're now calling a wicked mess. Yeah. Chaos, because we can't see ourselves through it. We need to bring different people together. So any leader who wants to define and solve these complex problems and conflicts has to, I don't care what the leader knows. The leader doesn't have to know anything except, how do you bring a group of diverse experts together? How do you create the infrastructure so I can take full advantage of that wisdom and knowledge? That's my role of leadership. Regarding the pandemic, if I know nothing about public health, medical science, that's okay. But do I know enough to bring those experts together to create an environment where they can have a good conversation, listen to one another, and see themselves through that kind of conversation? Then they can address their conflicts. They have to create the environment where conflict resolution can take place among diverse experts. That's the leader's role.
But they have to want to. You know, we see more than ever, it's like this, I always say it's this way or that way. There's really no middle ground. It's like, how do we become a bridge versus such a divide? And it reminds me of, it's a poem that talks about this king who wanted to change his kingdom. And he looked at the kingdom and he said, it's way too big. So he started looking at his community and he said, this is too big. And then he looked at his family and said, well, I want to change my family. He realized that that was too big. And then he looked in the mirror and he said, well, it starts with me. And I believe too that within conflict, it starts with us. Like, we have to be willing to look in the mirror and say, what's my part? What can I do? Correct?
Yeah, well, the famous quote by Gandhi is that, be the change you want to see in the world. It starts with you. Or Rumi, a famous poet from Afghanistan, said basically, when I was young, I wanted to change the world. When I was older and wiser, I wanted to change myself. It begins with ourselves, and then we have to reach out. So people need self-esteem, self-confidence, and they have to understand the nature of a complex problem. If our educational system is essentially teaching people that all we have is simple problems, get specialized and you'll do fine. In fact, ironic, the more degrees you get, the more specialized you become. You don't just get a degree, you get a set of blinders. Or as Abraham Maslow said, if you're a hammer, at some point, all you see is nails. Everything is a nail. That's all you know. And if our experts have been so trained and the culture supports looking at it from your single point of view, that you're right and everyone else is wrong, you can't define and solve our wicked messes. Yes, you can solve a simple problem at the end of the textbook, come up with the right answer in your specialty, but that's not the nature of the problems we face. Climate change, the economy, globalization, pandemics, poverty. These are complex messes that we have to use different areas of expertise to come together and solve. In fact, on the TKI conflict model, there is the dimension, I call it distributive dimension, that runs between competing and accommodating. It's the give and take dimension. You're right or I'm right, win, lose. The more I get, the less you get. A lot of our conflicts get stuck on the distributive dimension. Like I try to win my position and prove that you're wrong and vice versa, no matter what our specialty is. The other dimension, the other diagonal moves from compromising to collaborating. And we call that the integrative dimension. That's expanding the size of the pie. That's saying it's not either this or that, it's both. How can we combine these areas of expertise in a new way, in a creative way, to look at this problem from a new vantage point? Then the world starts opening up in a different way. But again, without an infrastructure of a supportive culture where there's love, compassion, there's trust, there's goodwill, there's decency, there is an engagement, there's a willingness to learn. Without those conditions, no conversation is going to happen across the disciplines. People will remain stuck in their own point of view.
Do you think that with everything that's been going on, do you think a lot of people are also going into the protective dimension where they're more of the avoiding?
Yeah, the one thing that my parents taught me about what they experienced with Hitler, and they actually saw Hitler live. I mean, that's not something to say is a wonderful thing to be, but they were parades, and my parents got to see Hitler live. And so again, that had a very powerful message for me. But essentially, with that experience, it's like there is such a division now that is built on fear. People by nature can be afraid, and it just takes something to stir it up. It takes a little paranoia. It takes a little conspiracy theory to say that people are after you. You're going to be harmed. They're coming over the border, and they're coming for you. They're coming for you. And people by nature can be scared. And when that happens at a collective level, yes, people will go to the protective dimension. The protective dimension is usually based on fear or spite. Sometimes with spite is just to make sure you don't get what you want, I'm going to take less myself. Okay, but that's rooted in anger and hatred and division. And of course, the other is fear. And in all social movements where there's been dictatorships or autocracies, there's usually a large element of fear where you grow and build on people's fear. And when you make that a collective, then people are willing to do anything to manage that fear. So yes, I think a lot of people are protective and they stay away from discussions because they're afraid they're going to be harmed if they speak up. And I've certainly had the sense that in our own federal government, people have been afraid to speak up. You know, that's been discussed many times, you know, and I'm not going to argue one side of the equation versus the other, but yes, I would say there's a lot of fear going on. So there's a lot of protection going on. And when you're on the protective dimension, which runs from avoiding to compromising, you can't even get up to a distributive dimension. You can't even get up to either this or that. You're just protecting yourself. You walk away. You don't talk. You go inward. You don't get involved in the conversation. You throw your hands up and let someone else do it. And of course, that the other extreme is the integrative dimension, where you expand the size of the pie and you get people working together and they come up with a synergistic solution that neither of them, any of the specialties, could have possibly come up on its own. You need other people to see the problem from all perspectives. In fact, my favorite story on this is an old Sufi tale, The Six Blind Men and the Elephant. And I'll just elaborate it very briefly. You have six blind people standing in different parts around the elephant, and they're asked, what is that? And a person who's by the tail says, oh, this must be a snake. Of course, that's all the person can perceive, what's right in front of them. That's like a specialty. That's all I see. A hammer, I see nails. I'm in front of this tail, it must be a snake. And then someone says something about the big foot, or the leg might be a tree trunk, and the tusk might be something else. And it's not until each expert say, wait a minute, if it's this, and this must be an elephant. But one blind person by himself or herself could have never determined it was an elephant. We need other people, but you have to listen to other people. You have to assimilate it. You have to respect it. You have to absorb it. Then you can figure out the beast in front of you is an elephant. Now, a simple problem is if you have 20/20 vision, and therefore these 6 people, each of them can see the entire elephant. Then you say, what is it? They say, well, it's an elephant. It's obvious. But that's an example of a simple problem solved by one specialty. But today, in our world, we are blind with our own specialties, looking at these complex, messy, wicked problems. And we have to realize we're dealing with an elephant, and we have blindness. We need other people, and we have to create the infrastructure so we can have that conversation. But you first have to know you're dealing with an elephant and you're blind. If you don't know that, you won't ask the right questions. You'll assume, oh, it's a snake because it's a tail, and that's all I can see. That's all I can perceive. Everything else is irrelevant. You can't make any headway if people believe that the world is made up of simple problems and my specialty is the answer.
So, and I always use the analogy of the beach ball, but I love this analogy so much more. You know, the beach ball is like, I only see red, you see yellow, someone else sees blue, green, and that's all we see, but we don't see 20/20. We're like, oh my gosh, it's a beach ball and it has all these different colors. It's the same concept. So,
Right.
so talking, I mean, conflict is huge, and what's going on. There are a lot of business owners, leaders, managers that are on this call right now and who are going to watch it later. And they're looking at, I mean, a lot of the states are back in shutdown. There's different things happening. There's so many unknowns. What advice would you give to them on leading their companies, leading their teams through conflict?
Well, first, to realize that conflict by its nature is neutral. Conflict will always be there. I use this phrase that, like death and taxes, conflict is inevitable. You can't eliminate it. So the question is, how do you manage it? A lot of people still experience conflict as bad because they had bad experiences with it. They've been hurt, so they shy away from conflict. But the reality is, if you can manage it well, create the infrastructure, get the different experts together, you then can effectively resolve your differences and come up with solutions that one expert by himself or herself could have never developed. You come up with solutions that cut across the disciplines, and then you get to see live in action synergy at work. And then you say, my God, thank God we had this conflict, because this allowed us to come up with something we would have never come up with if we stuck to our own specialty. So the first lesson is to understand that conflict is neutral, and it's a huge positive if you can get people to work together with an infrastructure, with an understanding of what is a complex mess and how is that fundamentally different from a simple problem. We have to understand this. The shame of it, Mary, is that most of our educational system still teaches students that the world is made up of simple problems. Learn this topic. We have a class on finance, on marketing, on accounting, on human resources. Well, there are business problems out there. Those single disciplines are limited in what they can do, especially when we got complex messes. We have to work across the boundaries, across the disciplines. So our educational system has to be adapted. People have to learn what is a complex mess and why do I have to work with other experts, no matter how excellent I am in my own specialty.
So how does change, and with all the change going on, impact conflict?
Well, first of all, the nature of the change is through the internet, through transportation, through globalization of political systems, the world is now truly this interconnected global village. So diversity is here to stay. In the old days, when we didn't have transatlantic travel, we didn't have the internet, then yes, we had separate countries, separate cities, and things were simpler. But that has changed. In fact, the pandemic shows how something that happens in one part of the world, like China, spreads throughout the entire planet, and it doesn't take long. Now, in the old days, let's say before 1900, maybe that wouldn't happen as much, but we still had a pandemic in the late 1918, 1919. But the point is, in today's world, it spreads more rapidly because we are so interconnected. And of course, the internet, when it has to do with complex problems, adds. You know, all the social misinformation, disinformation, all the discussions. In fact, social media has resulted in some revolutions where people get to see what's going on in other parts of the world. And so that changes their attitude. So we're in that kind of system now, which is beyond anything that we've experienced before. That makes for conflict. So as the world has changed towards globalization, towards the internet, towards greater diversity in the workplace, having men and women and people of color from all nationalities, those are differences. That makes for conflict. Now, again, is that bad? Well, if you see it as bad, you're not going to go very far with it. If you realize this is an opportunity to learn from others and get our arms around conflicts we could never address if we got stuck on our own specialty and our own viewpoint. And there's so many examples of this. I mean, I also make use of the Myers-Briggs type indicator. There's many personality assessments, but that is one that simply says, find out how you are and how you're different from others, but then you have to learn to work with others. It's not that your type is the only right type. There's other types. You look short-term, other people look long-term. Some people use logic, other people use feeling. Some people are ready to make a decision, some people need more information. Can we work with those differences? It's all about that. But because the world has become globalized and because it's gone through such great diversity and it's a fast-paced change and there's the internet, yes, we have more conflict.
Well, and I look at change that when change happens, typically it just rocks us because we crave stability, right? There's a piece of us that craves stability and another hand, it craves growth. But when we get rocked, we go into this protective mode because we're figuring out how to get back into stability, which creates conflict because we're not ready to change. Like we just need everything to go back to the way it was.
Well, one model that helps put that issue in perspective is developed in the 60s by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She wrote a book on death and dying, and she had a multi-stage model. And the first is loss, something happens, okay? And it's like the pandemic becomes on us, and now we are restricted. We've lost our lifestyle, our way of life. Next tends to be shock. It's like, no, I can't believe this, or denial. It didn't really happen. I'm dreaming. I can still go to that restaurant. I can still go to the football game. I can still go to the concert. No, you can't. Well, you first deny it. You think you're going to wake up the next morning, it will all be a dream. And then you also have anger, where this is not fair. This isn't supposed to happen. This was not in the cards for me. I don't want my life disrupted this way. And those early stages of the loss or the death and dying model is about loss, denial, shock, and anger. I call that the doom cycle. And you can get stuck in that, where you're constantly bemoaning what happened. It's not fair. You're angry. You're partly in denial because you're going to go out there. You're not going to worry about a mask. It's not real. It's not real. I don't have to worry about it. And then eventually you get to sadness. And the sadness is saying, it happened. I lost that. My life changed. Or I lost that position in the company, or we have to go through change. It's not going to be the same way. I'm sad because I was comfortable, but now I can finally feel it. I'm not in denial. I'm not angry. I feel the sadness. The next step then becomes acceptance. I have to accept this is the way it is. In fact, if you can't accept it, you're resisting. If you're resisting, you're suffering. Resistance is suffering. If you don't see and feel reality the way it is, you're resisting it, you're suffering. So you have to accept it. I'm sad, and I have to accept I did lose that, whatever that is. And then it's adaptability. Okay, how do I move forward? Now, when you have sufficient ego strength, you feel good about yourself, you're mentally healthy, and conflict is a positive, you go through those cycles faster. Some people have asked me, how long can you get stuck in the doom cycle? I said, for your entire life, if that's your choice. Or you can go through it quickly, but it takes self-confidence, self-esteem, an understanding of complex problems, and effective conflict management. And then you're willing to say, I lost it, I feel sad. And then you go through it, you accept, you adapt, and you adapt until another loss occurs. See, it's a cycle. You don't go through one loss, there's many losses. Some people have written books about life is loss and how do you cope? What is resiliency? What's adaptability? Well, today's chaotic world, we need adaptability and resiliency more than anything else. The opposite is sticking your head in the sand and being in denial and then getting angry about it and being in shock and not moving forward. We got to move forward. And if human beings can be adaptive, which I think is our nature, we didn't get here without being adaptive. It's just that in today's world, we are being asked to adapt in ways we've never had to 50, 100 years ago. The world is that complex. It's that much changing. It's that interconnected. We now need to adapt more than ever before. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. There's some scientists who believe we may be already past the tipping point for correcting the climate change that has taken place. And we can see what's happening with the pandemic. Things seem to be getting worse, not better. Now, there's a hope for a vaccine, but this won't be the last pandemic. To prepare for the next pandemic, that's the key. And that means that we have to start eating healthy diets. We have to become healthy. We have to pay attention to our immune system because there will be another pandemic. And hopefully we can learn from this and then be more adaptable. But complex messes are only going to increase in intensity and speed. And you can say, I don't like that. That's a loss. I want the world simple again. Well, you have to adapt. Otherwise, you're not coming along with the rest of society.
So what happens, because I mean, we've all seen this. It happens in our families. It happens in our workforce. It happens with our clients when they're out there meeting their customers. You have one person who's willing to move forward. They're being resilient. They're adapting, but the other party is not. Like, what can we do as an individual to help bridge that?
Okay. Of my 8-track program for transformation, the first track is the culture track. You have to allow people and encourage people to have a discussion on what are the cultural norms? How do we approach things when we're with one another? Do we face it? Do we not? Can we share what we're feeling? What norms can we develop for behavior that will allow us to learn from one another, listen to one another, and move forward? If in fact one person wants to move forward and one doesn't, then the culture says it's okay to be stuck. It's okay not to pay attention to what's going on. It's okay to be in denial. Denial is better than reality. And if that is the implicit cultural norm operating in a family, in a community, or an organization, it's hard to move forward. But it's a cultural discussion. What culture do we want to embody us on how we move forward together? So there has to be an acceptance that the community has a culture. We've seen all the turbulence that has gone on with systemic racism. Well, in our communities, there's a need for cultural change on saying, what does it mean, we the people? Who does that include? What is racism? What is white privilege? Is that a fantasy? Is it a hoax? Or is it real? Well, if you wind up having a serious conversation with people of color who've struggled with our institutions, you find out there's bias. Often white privilege means, I didn't experience it, therefore it doesn't exist. Well, you need to listen to people who have that experience. Again, that's going across the boundaries. It's listening to people with different specialties, life experiences, different families, different heritages, to listen with an open mind and open heart, and then incorporate a culture that allows people to come together and listen and learn and engage with one another.
I love it. Listen, learn, and engage. And it's not about making us right or wrong, because it goes back into your analogy of the 6 people and the elephant, the 6.
Yeah, we are truly, there's been a phrase used during the pandemic, we're in this together. Do we really know what that means? Mm-hmm. Is that really embodied in our life, in our family, in our community? We are in it together. That means I can't solve this alone. I need you. I need your experience. I need your heritage. I need your whiteness. I need your blackness. I need all of that to understand what's going on. Otherwise, I'm not dealing with reality. I'm running, I'm hiding, I'm pretending it will all go away on its own. That's not the way it works. That's not mental health. Mental health is facing reality as best as we can define it. We see things for what they are. We don't do things out of fear or out of suspicion. We engage effectively in a loving, compassionate way. It ultimately, Mary, it comes down to love. Yeah. It really does. It's about love and compassion, those higher energies that unite people. It's not about grief and anger and fear and pride and ego. That won't get you anywhere. It's love, peace, joy, and compassion. How different does that sound?
Right.
That's what we have to embody. One of my online courses is expanding consciousness. And to me, that's the foundation of everything. The nature of human beings is to understand themselves better and better over time, to become self-aware, and to move to the higher energies of joy, love, peace, and compassion. Any problem, any conflict looked at when you're generating energies that are love, joy, peace, and compassion is going to go better than if the energies are based on fear, anger, pride, and grief, and denial. Those are two different states of being.
Yeah.
We have to move and expand consciousness so people can be who they are and work with one another. That's what I believe we are destined to be. A whole community working together in love, joy, peace, and compassion. That's the answer on how to resolve conflict.
I love it. I always say we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And when we can get curious and really seek to understand and come from that place of love and acceptance, our world changes because it allows us to step into someone else's shoes, to look, from their viewpoint, to be empathetic, to create change.
Exactly. Yeah. So if there was one instruction I would give to organizations is help people expand their consciousness, mind, body, spirit, so they become clear who they are. They go beyond their ego. They're able to generate energies that engage people, that make people feel good about themselves, so people can listen and talk and resolve differences. We have to generate that. That's vital. If we approach problems at the lower energies, we're not going to get anywhere. It was Albert Einstein who said, you cannot solve a problem by the same consciousness that created it. And a lot of our problems were created by consciousness of denial, ego, pride, winning, losing, not about love, peace, joy, and compassion. So we have to change the energy that engages people together. We have to bring that about. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere, because we cannot solve today's problems with anger, fear, and pride and ego. It's not going to happen. And specialties and hammers. We need to embrace all the specialties, all the perspective, all the shades of people, because we all have something to contribute. We're all a piece of the puzzle. So how do you create an infrastructure to bring that about? Culture, skills, teamwork. Then we can go on to other things. Without that infrastructure, you can't even have a good conversation about anything.
So I have a question, and for those of you who are on here, so if you're watching Facebook Live, I can't see your question, so only the people who are on the webinar can. Edward Powers says, he's talking about conflict avoidance seems to be the default in the American business and academic culture today, but not in American foreign policy, politics, or media. Do you have any thoughts on why this interesting juxtaposition exists?
Well, avoiding is one of those curious conflict modes that has many shades. There's good avoiding and bad avoiding. I don't want to oversimplify it. But good avoiding is when you remove yourself from a situation that's harmful. You don't have enough information. You need more time to think things through. People are upset, and so they need some time to cool down and relax. Bad avoiding is when you got a complex mess and you walk away from it. You don't engage with the other experts in the room. You believe if they're not going to listen to me and adopt my position, I'm not going to waste my time with them, so I'm out of here. That's bad avoiding. So you will find in different circles, whether it's your family, the neighborhood, an organization, or the international scene, you'll see the different sides of avoiding. And when people feel the stakes are high, they may come out of their shell and engage more. But again, without the infrastructure, culture, skills, teamwork, that engagement will not be effective or successful. But if you want successful engagement, you need the leaders and the different countries and the institutions that are meant to resolve these international crises and problems to have an infrastructure so people listen, they can talk. I mean, we can get translators and interpreters, we can deal with the language issue, but we still have to deal with the human issue of what does it take for people to open their hearts, speak their mind, but listen to one another, incorporate it. go beyond their own specialty. We have to do this on the international level. We have to do this at the domestic level. We have to do that in each and every family. It's just different levels of analysis. But again, the avoiding mode comes out differently. You have to be aware, under what conditions is avoiding the best choice? Well, when people are afraid, when the problem's not important, when there's no time, when people are upset, when people are angry and you can't have a good conversation anyway, yeah, walk away, come back at another time. But when in fact you're dealing with vital issues like climate change, the pandemic, to avoid solutions is to create more havoc, more danger, more hurt, and more harm. So choose avoiding wisely. Actually, I would say this, each of the 5 conflict modes has different shades of when it can be effective and when not. Learn those 8, I have these 8 attributes to read the situation that will help you determine which conflict mode is most likely to satisfy your needs, other people's needs, and address the conflict at hand.
Would you actually, for those who are watching and may not know what the TKI is, would you actually explain the 5 different modes?
Sure. The basic mode, there are 5. They're based on 2 dimensions, which is assertiveness and cooperativeness. Assertiveness is the extent to which you try to get your needs met in the situation. Cooperativeness is the extent to which you try to get the other person's needs in the situation. And then on this 2x2 model, we kind of plot these 5 conflict modes. So competing is high on assertiveness and low on cooperativeness. You're only concerned with getting your needs met and winning the argument. You're not at all concerned about the other person. Accommodating is just the opposite. It's saying, I'm not at all concerned about getting my needs met. I want to help you get your needs met. Maybe your needs are more important. Maybe this problem is more vital to you than it is to me. I want to help you out. Compromising is in between competing and accommodating. It's like we split the difference. You know, you suggest, let's meet at 4, let's meet at 3, let's split it, make it 3:30. No big deal. We just split it in half. Okay, that's easier when the conflict is on one dimension, like the time to meet. Then I mentioned avoiding. That is low on assertiveness and low on cooperativeness. I'm not concerned for the moment of getting my needs met or your needs met. I don't want to deal with this. I'm leaving the room. I'm leaving the discussion. I'm staying away from this. Okay? And again, there's good and bad times to do that. But recognize that if you avoid on important issues, you and other people are not getting your needs met. And if that happens over a period of time, especially for important needs, people will either disengage from the situation or just leave. You know, it's like employees who do the minimum to get by just to stay in the organization until something better gets along. That's a form of avoiding. Or if they get so sick and tired of not getting their needs met, they'll quit, okay? And then finally, there's collaborating, which first sounds so ideal. We should collaborate all the time. Collaboration is high on assertiveness and high on cooperativeness. I'm doing my best to get my needs met and your needs met. It's not either or, it's both. And that's what I mean by you expand the size of the pie. You come up with interesting combinations of a solution where people say, yeah, okay, I got what I want out of this. Did you get what you wanted out of this too? Yeah, that's collaborating. But collaborating can only work under a limited set of conditions. Bad collaborating is you're trying to collaborate and there's no trust. People are not having a conversation and there's no time. And there you are trying to collaborate. It's not going to work. But when there's trust, when there's time, when the issue is vital to both people, when there's good communication skills, when the culture supports the dialogue, when the reward system supports the dialogue, where the boss supports the dialogue, and you have the time, then collaborate. So each mode has its uses, good and bad, effective, ineffective. But then again, there are these 8 attributes that determine which mode works best under what conditions. They have to do with stress. If there's high levels of stress, forget about collaborating. People will not listen. They're too stressed out to have a good conversation. They need time. They have to trust one another. The issue has to be important to both people. The culture has to support it, so on and so forth. And you want the relationship to last. That's another one. If you don't want the relationship to last, keep asserting yourself. Who cares if the other person doesn't get their needs met? But don't get surprised when that person doesn't want to talk to you again, because that person's going to leave the situation, okay? So again, you find out what those 8 attributes are. You read the situation, which is like social emotional intelligence, to be able to read your environment, the social cues, and then you pick the modes that work best. And as change develops, as the situation changes, the 8 attributes change. So you may start out with competing, you may then do some accommodating, you may do some compromising, and then you may create the conditions where you can really do collaborating over the most important issues for both of you.
Eric loves to live in collaboration. I'm like, babe, we don't have time. It's not that important to me. He's like, no, we just got to talk about it. I'm no, just make a decision.
Yeah. Yeah. But when it's really important and vital and complex and people can be harmed or hurt, spend some time on it. Find a way, take the time, make the time, and then create the conditions. If you don't have the conditions, whether you have the time or not is irrelevant. As I said, you can get diverse experts in the room. Without the infrastructure, they will never have a conversation and learn from one another. It's like ships going past one another at night in a storm. They are totally unaware of one another's presence. They may be sitting in the room. There's no regard, no respect. My expertise should win the day. It's the only one that's relevant. That attitude cannot address the wicked messes we're facing today.
Yeah, I always look at, especially with conflict that we're in, is it important? Like, how important is the relationship? And I'm like, if it's important, do we have trust? Like, how do we build that trust to where we can have the conversation, where we can communicate effectively? And I always, those are kind of my go-to, because if it, I mean, looking at time, right? I'm looking at, but I go back into, where's this relationship? And do I need to build on the trust? Do I need to ask for forgiveness? Do I need to step back and go, it doesn't have to be about me, you know, where are they coming from?
Well, you pointed out something very important, this issue of trust. It is foundational, because without it, you can forget about collaborating on anything. Because to trust means that I can share what I really need and want, and you're not going to put me down and use it against me. And sometimes people don't share because they say, I expressed what I wanted before and I got ridiculed for it, or I didn't get what I want. Why should I take the chance? Or they used it against me. They said, oh, but earlier you said this. Okay, so if there's no trust, you can't have any collaborative solution. And ideally, for the complex messes, the wicked messes we face, which are vital for the survival of the human race, we have to find a way to collaborate. We have to find a way to collaborate. We have to trust. And yet, when there's such division, such fear, it makes it more difficult to trust. People are afraid of being hurt. So this country needs to go through a very intensive healing process, because trust has been destroyed. People believe that everyone is lying to them. I don't believe what you say. You're making it up, and your reality is different than mine. How can we be on the same planet and have such different realities? We have to heal that divide. Otherwise, there's no collaboration and no possibility of solving the problems of climate change, nuclear safety, pandemics, political upheaval, other kinds of health issues and crises can't be solved unless we can collaborate. So we have to find a way to reestablish the trust that has been eroding. And again, you look through the history of the world. Again, if you don't understand history, it will repeat.
Sure.
And you find out that where there are these inflection points of difficulty, it's when trust has broken down and people are living in fear. And they don't believe what you say anymore. They're just trying to go into protective mode, even if it means denial, shock, and anger. And you've broken down all communication across the boundaries. And by the boundaries, I mean racial boundaries, ethnic boundaries, gender boundaries, sexual boundaries, specialty boundaries. The opposite is, we got to bring this all together. The whole of it is required to solve the whole messes we have. It's the elephant. It's the only way we can address that beast, is we got to bring it all together.
I would love to hear a story, because you've worked with, like, I look at the list of all the companies that you've worked with and consulted with. I would love to hear a story about, like, you don't have to say the name of the company, but a mess that they had that you helped them bridge the divide and created what you were talking about, like the healing.
Okay, one of my favorite stories, it just popped in my head as you said that. It took place in Spain, in the late 1980s, early 90s. Just so you know the history, Spain was a dictatorship. In 1974, Franco was no longer, and it became a so-called democracy. But 1974, I was there 15 years later in the late 80s. That was still very current in people's minds. If they disagreed with what was going on, they would be jailed, okay? Or worse, okay? So people were still afraid. It was 15 years ago, but it's still in the consciousness of the people in Spain. So I dared to do my 8-track program because I was working with a very progressive company that wanted to get into the European Union and compete. Spain was a little backward at that time because of the whole Franco regime, and they wanted to be more competitive. And nobody would talk during these workshops. So I would talk and I would talk. I'd ask no questions. It was totally quiet. So we started work on the culture track. And then we got into the discussion on what is the consequence if I speak up? Well, I'll be sent to jail. I said, this company's not going to send you to jail. You don't know that for sure. You don't know what's going to happen. They were afraid.
No trust.
So we had to develop conversations on what is reality, what's likely to happen. Franco was 15 years ago. What's going on now? And what should the new norms be? The new norms be take the chance to trust. Speak your mind. Maybe bad things won't happen. If you don't test it out, it will never happen. Or I use the analogy of you put a dog in a cage and the bars are all electrified. So he tries to get out, he gets electrocuted or gets a shock. And after a while, you don't have to have electricity going through the bars on the cage anymore because this dog is not testing that out anymore. So he'll starve to death. He won't go out and get the food because he doesn't want to get electrocuted. So it stays with you, okay? So we had to talk about that. And then it got to the point, it took about 6 to 9 months. And boy, did they start talking. And I remember vividly coming into a workshop session. We were probably that time into the team track or the strategy structure track. And I remember commenting to the people, I said, okay, can we stop talking now? We have to talk about this now. We're back on topic. I want to show you a presentation slide. And then I said, you know, I remember the days I would come in here and no one was talking. It was so peaceful and quiet. Now I can't shut you up. And they just laughed. They just laughed. But it took about 9 months. In fact, the culture track takes 9 months, and you can think about what else happens in 9 months. It is a rebirthing. It is a rebirthing, absolutely. But it can be done in that period of time. But you need to have conversations about those tough subjects in a supportive environment led by leadership, where the leadership says, I want to create an infrastructure so we can get the most out of our human resources. We have such talent here. If we're not talking and sharing, I'm paying money for you guys and I'm not getting anything out of it. We got to create the infrastructure that will bring our wisdom to light. It takes 9 months, and then it's a whole different organization.
But with that, it also has to have vision. The leaders have to have the vision, because you have a lot of companies that they don't have a clarity of vision and they just want you to fix their people. They want to fix the mess, but they don't even know where they're going or what they.
No, this was an enlightened leader. In fact, I sat in on the board of directors meeting where the board of directors was complaining that this is taking too long, it's costing too much. We spend on new technology instead of the silly program for infrastructure. And then the CEO, who was just an ex officio member of the board, he wasn't the director or on the board himself, he said, okay. And they all told him that. I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying. What you're telling me is that we have to move forward with this program no matter what. And they each looked at one another. That's not what we said. He was determined, no matter what people said or what people complained about, he was going to move his company into the 20th and 21st century. He was determined. And he got away with it. He had the clout to do it. So yes, it does take enlightened leadership who understands the nature of the complex problem, realizes that these specialties have to work together, and that it requires a culture, a set of skills for managing complexity and cooperation that extends throughout the organization, across all the boundaries, jobs, departments, levels in the hierarchy. In fact, the ultimate test is you don't know the people, you go into a room, and then someone says to you, who's the CEO? And then ordinarily you look at who's talking the most and you say, he's the CEO. Well, why is he the CEO? Well, because he's doing all the talking. No, That's not the CEO. Well, who's the CEO? She is. Well, she didn't say anything. She's making that process take place. And when you go through the culture, skills, and team track, you create a different environment where what matters is what you know, and you say it, not your position in the hierarchy or what department you come from. That's when all the wisdom, knowledge, and expertise is out there, available for everyone to use. That's how you solve a complex mess in today's world.
Well, I am going to actually bring up the last poll, and it's just for feedback. If you want, oops, sorry guys, I never put that one off the screen. It's been stuck on their screen. I got so into what you were saying. If you want more information on what Ralph does, I'll send you the link to the Kilmann Diagnostics. And as they're filling out the feedback, just your last thoughts. So what's your message? What do you want to get out to viewers, to this world, that could help them within the conflict that they're dealing with?
Well, I believe that everything I'm saying is very doable, but you have to know it's doable. And you have to commit to saying, I have to understand the nature of complexity. What is a complex problem? I can't pretend the world is simple and that all we face is simple problems. And with that complexity comes a stream, an incessant stream of conflicts and problems day in and day out. How do I manage those conflicts are going to determine how well I succeed in addressing my needs and everyone else's needs and the needs of society. But it starts with understanding the nature of complexity. It starts with knowing you have to have a certain kind of infrastructure so you can bring people together to have that conversation so you can resolve the most important conflicts and problems that our society faces.
Ralph, I am so grateful, and I said that earlier, yet you have no idea just how humbled and grateful I am to have you in my life and Eric's life. The things that you have taught us, the ability to partner with you and help bring your work to life is such a gift, such a gift. And I believe, it's to pay it forward. The more that we understand, the more we take action. It starts with us. We can change this world. We can change our communities. We can change our businesses. We can change our families. But it starts with us. And as you were saying it brilliantly earlier, it's love, it's acceptance, it's understanding.
Yeah, it's not rocket science, it's human science. And it's all very doable. You don't have to create a new technology to bring this about. You just have to open your heart. You have to speak with love and compassion, and you have to recognize that you need other people to solve our complex messes. That's not that complicated. And creating the infrastructure, you set a process in motion. It's going to work. We know how to do it, but people have to know that they need it, and they have to commit to being the best version of themselves and the best version of human society.
Absolutely. I had someone just made a comment, so simple yet so complicated, brilliance, what a fabulous man, and I absolutely agree.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure and honor for me that you invited me, Mary. I absolutely adore the work you're doing, and thank you so much for allowing me to participate.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thank you. Have an amazing rest of your day, everyone. And Ralph, we will be in contact super soon.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. Have a blessed day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.